the man known to history as Genghis Khan, was born in the middle of the 12th century, while different sources place his year of birth between 1155 and 1167. The most commonly accepted date is 1162. His personal name was Temujin, and he was a member of the Borjigin clan. There is also no consensus on Genghis' place of birth, but it is likely that he was born around the upper valley of the Onan River, near the sacred mountain of Birken Kaldan in the Kentiai Mountains in northeastern Mongolia. Temujin's father was a Mongol chieftain named Yasujai. According to the secret history of the Mongols, the official history of Genghis' life and conquests written for the Mongol royal family after his death, Yasujai was the grandson of Kublai Khan, the head of the Borjigin clan in the early 12th century. Some historians argue that this could have been later propaganda to enhance Genghis' lineage, and Yasujai was not related to the royal clan at all. Nevertheless, he was clearly the leader of a fearsome band of warriors who served Kabul's son Kuchula in the 1150s. Yasujai was also the sworn brother of Togril, the leader of the Karaite tribe, one of the 5 major tribal confederations of Mongolia. Yasujai and Togril often fought against the Merkit Confederation, and in around 1160, Yasujai abducted a 15-year-old girl named Holan, who had been betrothed to a Merkit chieftain, sparking a feud that would last more than half a century. Over the course of the following decade, Holan would give Yasujai 4 sons and a daughter, of whom Temujin was the oldest. By the time of Temujin's birth, Yasujai already had 2 sons from another wife, and he was not his eldest son or a clear heir of any kind to him. From a young age, Temujin learned horsemanship and archery, the 2 skills that formed an essential part of warfare for the nomadic peoples of the Eurasian steppe, the vast steppe stretching from Hungary in the west to Manchuria in the east. As a child, Temujin was also introduced to hunting and falconry, which would become his favorite pastimes as an adult. While Temujin was close to his siblings, his closest childhood friend was a boy from the Jadarad clan named Jamuga, and the 2 became sworn brothers. During his childhood, Temujin began to learn about the complex relationships among the Mongolian tribes. The Mongol tribe into which Temujin was born was divided into 2 major clans, the Borjigin and the Takyid. The Mongols were one of 5 major tribes in the region, the others being the Karaite, Merkit, Tartars, and Naiman. The peoples of Mongolia were surrounded by powerful neighbors. To the east and southeast was Imperial China, which since 1115 had been ruled by the Jin dynasty founded by the Jurchen tribe from Manchuria. To the south was the Western Xia, in northwest China, ruled by the Tanga people from Tibet. To the north was the desolate and inhospitable region we call Siberia today, while substantially to the west and southwest were the Muslim powers of Central Asia and the Middle East, which were in a period of some decline by the 12th century, the Arab Caliphate having gone through its golden age centuries earlier, between the 8th and 10th centuries. In around 1171, when Temujin was probably around 9 years old, he was betrothed to Borte, the daughter of Dai Sechin, a chief of the Angharad tribe. The leaders of prominent Mongol families often married Angharad women, but this required Temujin and his father to travel on a long journey across the Gobi Desert to take part in the betrothal ceremony. Although he was a powerful warrior, Yasujai could only afford to offer Dai Sechin a single horse for his daughter. Although the Angharad chief agreed to the match, he stipulated that the horse would serve as an initial dowry, and until a greater dowry was paid, Temujin would have to stay behind and work for his future father-in-law. While the Young Temujin was ashamed that his father could not afford to pay for his bride straight away. He spent 3 happy years among the Ungurad, working as a herder. Temujin heard stories about the burgeoning trade between the Ungurad and the wealthy Jin Empire south of the Great Wall. Temujin's time with the Ungurad ended when he was around 12 years old. During one of his raids, Yasujai encountered a band of Tartars. Rather than launching an attack, the Tartars invited him to dinner. Bound by the steppe traditions of hospitality, Yasujai felt he could not refuse and was duly poisoned by his hosts. The slow-acting poison enabled Yasujai to leave instructions to bring Temujin back home. Although Dai Sechin was reluctant to part with the boy, he recognized the difficulties Temujin's family faced and allowed him to leave. By the time Temujin returned home, his mother Holun had tried and failed to assume her late husband's leadership position. In the name of her teenage sons, and the Takyid claimed leadership among the Mongols once again. As Holun's followers deserted her one by one, she and her sons were reduced to destitution and forced to hunt and fish to survive. Temujin and his brother Khazar proved the most effective at catching the prey, but their elder half-brothers, Bagtur and Belgudiai, began to lay claim to their food. On one occasion, Bagtur stole a large fish that Temujin and Khazar had caught and proceeded to cook and eat it. The younger half-brothers responded by ambushing Bagtur while Belgudiai was away and showering him with arrows. While Belgudiai did not seek to avenge his brother's death, Holun was incensed and warned her sons that the family could not hope to confront their real enemies by fighting and killing each other. Holun's fears proved justified, as the Takyid leader Targatai used Bagtur's murder as the pretext to capture Temujin. The boy escaped into the woods and survived for 6 days, before hunger eventually forced him to escape, during which effort he was captured and taken into Takyid captivity. Although he was forced to wear a device that restricted his movements, he managed to overcome his guard and was rescued by a sympathizer to the Borjigin cause. By the time he returned to his family, the 14-year-old Temujin found them without anything to their name apart from 9 horses. A once proud family had fallen quickly when the Takyid then raided their camp and took 8 of the horses. Temujin took the remaining steed and relentlessly pursued the enemy. On his way, he encountered a young warrior named Boarshu, who immediately became his friend and companion, and joined the pursuit of the Takyid. After recovering the horses in a daring night raid, they were struggling to get away from the Takyid riders when Temujin noticed that the leader of the pursuit had ridden far ahead of the rest of his men. Boarshu took the opportunity to fire an arrow which wounded the Takyid leader, enabling the pair to get away safely. Over the next few years, Temujin and Boarshu would build up a band of loyal raiders. During this period, another gifted warrior named Barokal joined Temujin and became a close companion. In around 1178, when Temujin was 16 years old or so, he rode to Ungurad territory in Boarshu's company and claimed Borte as his bride from his proud father-in-law, Dai Sechin, having been away for several years. 2 years later, Temujin would suffer one of the worst humiliations of his life. A large Merkit raiding party of 300 horsemen descended upon Temujin's camp and scattered them. Although Temujin managed to escape with his brothers and his mother Holun, Borte appears to have been deliberately left behind in order to enable Temujin's flight. As he pondered how to recover his wife, Temujin reached out to the Karaite chief Togril and appealed to him by reminding him of his sworn brotherhood with Temujin's late father, Yasujai. Togril accepted Temujin as his adopted son and organized a large army to fight the Merkit. The alliance prevailed in the ensuing campaign and Borte was rescued. During her time in Merkit captivity, Borte had been given to the brother of the Merkit chief, and by the time of her liberation she was pregnant with his child. Nevertheless, when Borte gave birth to a son in 1182, Temujin accepted the child as his own and gave him the name Joki. The following year, Borte gave birth to a second son, a biological child of Temujin named Chagatai, who would never stop reminding his father of Joki's illegitimacy. Now in his early 20s, Temujin had established himself as a reasonably powerful Mongol leader, but also one who was widely feared and respected for his bravery. His main rival during this period was Jumuga, his childhood friend and sworn brother, who was by the early 1180s the leader of the Jaderad clan. The two men had crossed paths again as part of the coalition against the Merkit. But after a couple of years they went their separate ways, each with ambitions to unite the Mongols under their leadership. Although Jumuga could count on larger numbers and the support of an older and more conservative generation, Temujin had the support of most of the Borjigin clan and was attracting many talented followers from humble backgrounds to his cause. These included Jelm, a recruit from one of the tribes who lived in the northern forests, and his 10-year-old brother Sabidii, who despite his youth would soon become a trusted and talented warrior. In 1186, Temujin's wife Borte gave birth to a third son, Ogidii. The same year, Temujin's followers elected him Khan of the Borjigin clan. However, his rise was seemingly halted the following year after he was defeated by Jumuga's army at a place called Dalan Baljit. The main sources for Genghis or Temujin's life are silent for several years thereafter, suggesting that he had lost most of his following and was forced into exile. According to the biography of Sabidii, during this period, Temujin and his remaining followers took refuge in the Jin Empire in China. Temujin's absence deprived Togrul of a powerful ally, and Kurait Khan was also overthrown and forced into exile. In 1195, Temujin finally had the opportunity to re-establish himself when the Jin and the Tartars began fighting over the spoils following a joint victory against the Angharad. Temujin offered an alliance with the Jin frontier commander and proceeded to deal the Tartars a series of heavy defeats in 1196. The resulting plunder made Temujin rich, and he used his position to re-establish his alliance with Togrul and restore him as the Kurait Khan. In 1197, Temujin exploited the momentum in his victory against the Tartars by reviving his feud with the Merkit. 21-year-old Sabidii infiltrated the Merkit camp and used the intelligence he gathered to lead a short and victorious campaign. A further series of victories followed in the late 1190s and into the early 1200s for Temujin and his allies against the Merkit and other rival peoples of the steppes such as the Naiman. These victorious campaigns caused considerable anxiety among rival tribes, who in response elected Jumuga as universal Khan, a grander title than Temujin's own. Over 15 tribes had joined this new coalition, but many individuals were disaffected and supported Temujin's cause by passing on key intelligence about the coalition's plans. Forewarned of a surprise attack by Jumuga, Temujin sought Togrul's assistance and won an easy victory. As a snowstorm threw the coalition forces into disarray, Temujin pursued Jumuga's Taikiad allies and engaged them at Khoitan by the banks of the Onan River and routed them again. However, on this occasion he was wounded in the neck by a poisoned arrow. According to Mongol lore, his life was only saved because his general, Jelm, sucked the venom from the wound and spat it out while Temujin lay unconscious. As the prisoners of war were rounded up, the man who had been responsible for the near-fatal wound, was brought in front of the Khan. Rather than executing him, Temujin praised him for his marksmanship and recruited him as an officer. He soon acquired the nickname Jeeb, or the Arrow, and would go on to become one of the Khan's greatest commanders. Jumuga's defeat led to the temporary fragmentation of his coalition, yet by 1202 he had formed a new alliance with the Naiman and a number of defectors from Temujin's forces, including several disaffected uncles and his brother Khazar. Jumuga then launched a concerted attack on Temujin, but the Borjigin Khan proved equal to the situation, maneuvering his forces skillfully and switching between guerrilla tactics and field battles. In the winter, after a formal ceremony confirming him as heir to Togril's Kharit Khanate, Temujin and his adopted father defeated the Naiman. In an effort to consolidate his alliance with Togril, he proposed that his son Joki marry Togril's daughter. The proposal infuriated Togril's disinherited son Ilka, who defected to Jumuga after his father refused to break ties with Temujin. With Ilka at his side, Jumuga rode to Togril's camp and forced him to join the anti-Temujin coalition. In 1203, Temujin was defeated by a Kharit army commanded by his adoptive father but escaped with around half his force when Jumuga called off the pursuit. His old companion Boarshu and his son Ogidi were initially unaccounted for and returned to camp with heavy wounds, while an angry Temujin sent a series of letters to his former supporters accusing them of betraying him. He began to build a new coalition from his new base near the Baljuna convent. Temujin and his senior commanders swore an oath to fight to the bitter end. Meanwhile, the members of the coalition lost faith in Togril's leadership, and Temujin's brother Khazar returned to his side. In the autumn, Temujin went on the offensive against Togril and defeated the Kharit army after a hard-fought battle that lasted 3 days until Temujin's General Makali broke through to the enemy's camp. While escaping from the battlefield, Togril was killed by some Naiman bandits. Temujin then assumed the leadership of the Kharit and announced the unification of the Mongol and Kharit nations and welcomed several of Togril's lieutenants into his ranks. Temujin's latest success led to the formation of another coalition between Jumuga and the Naiman. As part of his preparations for this final confrontation, Temujin began to reorganize his army into units of tens, hundreds, and thousands, following the example of the Jin Chinese Empire. He also formed an elite bodyguard and began to set up administrative structures to govern the recently pacified tribes. He soon developed a formula which promised autonomy to peoples who agreed to submit without a fight, while threatening dreadful consequences for those who chose to resist, a method of psychological warfare which would be used consistently by the Mongols in their conquests over the next century. In 1204, Temujin convened a Kuriltai or Grand Council to plan the upcoming campaign against the Naiman. The Khan was persuaded to launch his campaign early on May 17, 1204. By the end of June, the Mongols reached Naiman territory and the first clashes took place. Although his army was far smaller than the enemy's, Temujin ordered his men to light 5 fires per person at night to give the impression of superior numbers. The Naiman commander, Tayang Khan, was deceived by this ruse and proposed retreating to friendlier terrain. In the Altai Mountains, however, his subordinates compelled him to pursue an active strategy. Over the next few months both armies danced around each other until Tayang prepared to do battle at Chakramat at the foot of Mount Naku, as Temujin and his leading generals spearheaded the attack. Jumuga suddenly led his men away from the field, depriving Tayang of his numerical superiority. Despite this, the Naiman army resisted bravely but Temujin's initial charge caught them off guard, and the Mongols gradually surrounded their valiant enemies as they retreated up the slopes of Mount Naku. Temujin was astonished to see the enemy storm down the hill in a last-gasp charge and offered the name in honorable terms of surrender. But they preferred to fight to the last man. Taiyang was taken prisoner and died of the wounds sustained during the battle not long afterwards. Most of his allies submitted to Temujin. At the age of 42, after suffering several setbacks over the course of his life, Temujin had vanquished his enemies and united over 30 tribes under his rule in a large tract of the Asian steppe. Temujin's victory at Chakramaut seemed decisive, but the mysterious Jamuga was still unaccounted for. While most of his followers had deserted him and submitted to Temujin, he fled into the mountains with a dwindling band of men. Upon hearing that Temujin had put a large bounty on his head, the 5 men who remained with Jamuga tied him up and brought him to Temujin. As Temujin prized loyalty above all else, he executed Jamuga's captors for their treachery but took considerably longer to decide on the fate of his sworn brother. Eventually he ordered his sadistic nephew Eljigidai to carry out a brutal execution by hacking him to pieces. In 1205, Temujin began to launch raids against the Tanguts to the south, while Sabidai worked to further pacify the new subjects of the Mongols by suppressing a fresh Merkit rebellion. The following year, 1206, Temujin held another Kuriltai which brought together all the Mongol nobles to officially proclaim the creation of a new Mongol Empire. It was at this juncture that Temujin was given a new title, Genghis Khan, which should more accurately be rendered as Genghis Khan. The name is usually translated as universal ruler, though recent scholarship suggests fierce ruler is a better translation. Temujin accepted the imperial throne on the condition that everyone would obey his word. After assuming imperial power, Genghis began to reward his followers. His long-standing companions Borshu and Baroko were given the highest ranks, while the likes of Jeeb and Sabidai were ranked one step below. The 4 were members of a 9-man cabinet that enjoyed the greatest privileges and took part in key decision-making alongside the Khan. While Genghis had united the tribes of Mongolia through conquest, he faced a monumental task in eliminating various tribal and clan loyalties to forge a single Mongol nation. In order to achieve this, Genghis set out to build a new political system in which his subjects placed allegiance to the Khan and the Mongol nation above kinship ties. The success of this would depend on his ability as Khan to provide his people with huge amounts of wealth plundered from enemies through new conquests. This incentive system demanded frequent campaigns outside the new empire's borders, and Genghis consequently continued the military reorganization that he had started in the latter stages of his unification campaigns. The basic organizational unit in the new decimal system was the Minkan, or 1,000 men, though the formidable Tumun, or 10,000, is more widely known. Since each of Genghis' subjects was attached to a Minkan, this decimal system was also intended to replace the old social structure of clans and tribes. While most of the leaders of the Minkans were from the old aristocracy, a significant minority had more humble origins, reflecting the meritocratic ethos that had allowed Genghis to find some of his greatest commanders among the lower classes. To cap it all off, Genghis strengthened his bodyguard, or kashig, to over 10,000 men, who were recruited from the sons of powerful men to ensure their good behavior. Genghis gave his 4 sons senior responsibilities. Joki was master of the hunt. Chagatai was responsible for enforcing the new law code. Ogdi served as head of the nascent civil bureaucracy, and the youngest Talyui was named commander-in-chief. Despite this, Genghis' sons complained that they lacked military authority. And apart from Talui, their military authority only extended to their own Ninkins. This prompted Genghis to set up a new division of empire to placate his sons in 1209. 45,000 men were divided amongst Genghis' family members, and the 4 sons were each given their own fiefs with the potential of further expansion, while Genghis stipulated that these realms would be subject to control by the central government. The imperial princes often ignored the officials appointed by their father to monitor their activities, and their domains would eventually form the basis of increasingly independent states under their descendants. As part of his state-building program, Genghis introduced a new law code known as the Great Yasa. While large parts of the Yasa codified the traditional customs of the steppe peoples, it was also an attempt to establish a common set of laws for the new Mongol nation. Part of the code took the form of military regulations concerning the mobilization of armies, the duties of officers, and the punishment they would suffer if they failed to carry out those duties. With regard to taxation, Genghis gave generous exemptions to religious leaders and foreign merchants, while the Khan maintained his traditional pagan beliefs. His policy of religious toleration would eventually allow him and his successors to rule over a vast empire of Buddhists, Muslims, Nestorian Christians, and Confucians right across Asia. He maintained good relations with the Muslim merchants who operated along the Silk Road to the west and sought Mongol assistance to access the Chinese markets to the east. There were also harsh elements to this. For instance, the Yasa mandated the death penalty for a wide range of crimes, including lying, contaminating running water, and the failure to share food with strangers. Though wealthy criminals could often escape capital punishment by paying large fines, the Yasa only applied to Mongols, and there was little consideration for the fate of foreigners. Accordingly, the Mongols habitually captured foreign women on campaign and took them as concubines. Genghis and his sons had the first pick of the female captives, and he would go on to have 23 official wives and a harem of over 500 women. Some geneticists and historians have speculated that as many as 16 million people today may be descended from Genghis Khan. Over the course of the 3 years between 1206 and 1209, Genghis continued to make changes to his new military organization, and parts of the Kashid, or bodyguard, were assigned specialist duties, such as intelligence gathering, surveying and mapmaking, and organizing the supplies for the army. In peacetime, the annual hunt organized by jockeys served as the main form of training for Genghis armies. As in a military campaign, the 2 Muns would work together and surround the animals across a large area before gradually closing in for the kill. Anyone who allowed an animal to escape the net or killed an animal before the Khan's arrival was subject to severe penalties. Once everything was ready, Genghis and his inner circle would descend upon the encircled animals before allowing the officers and their men to complete the slaughter. The exercise not only enabled the Mongol armies to practice their maneuvers and communication methods, but also provided a vast quantity of food to feed the men. The Mongol cavalryman's primary weapon was the bow and arrow, and each man would carry a short-range and long-range bow. Each horse archer was equipped with 60 arrows in total, divided into short-range and long-range projectiles, though the most ferocious was the relatively small composite bow, which required great upper body strength to use effectively, but which landed arrows with devastating speed and power. Most notably, it could be fired from horseback while riding by a skilled cavalry archer. It was this weapon which would enable the enormous conquests which were to follow. Each Mongol warrior also had at least 6 horses, enabling them to travel up to 65 miles a day. The speed at which Mongol armies moved was Genghis' main strategic advantage. Since his armies were often outnumbered by the enemy, Genghis employed a range of tactics to exaggerate the size of his own forces. One of the best-known Mongol tactics was the feigned retreat. If the army was struggling to make progress against a strong defensive position, it would withdraw from the field and leave their plunder behind. While the enemy was distracted by the loot, the Mongols would turn back and cut them to pieces in the open field. Although the Mongols later employed Chinese siege engineers, they were not used to siege warfare, and Genghis initially avoided attacking well-fortified cities. He preferred to attack smaller towns and distributed the resulting plunder evenly among his otherwise unpaid troops. After his elevation as Khan, Genghis rarely took personal command of military campaigns, preferring to send his sons and senior generals. Instead, in 1207, Joki led a successful campaign against the Turkic forest peoples in southern Siberia, who included the Buryat, Kyrgyz, and Oirad. In 1208, Sabiti won a crushing victory against the ever-rebellious Merkit, though he was criticized by Genghis for allowing some to escape further north. In 1209, Genghis secured the submission of the Uyghur kingdom in East Turkestan, now the Chinese autonomous region of Xinjiang. The Uyghurs had once ruled a mighty empire that included much of Mongolia, but by the beginning of the 13th century they had submitted to the Karakhitai, whose empire extended from modern-day Kazakhstan into northwest China. Genghis subsequently recruited many Uyghurs into the Mongol imperial administration and adopted the Uyghur script for the first official Mongol written texts. With the conquest of the forest peoples and the submission of the Uyghurs, Genghis laid much of the groundwork for an invasion of China. Since the collapse of the Tang dynasty in 907 AD, China had been divided between a number of competing dynasties. At the beginning of the 13th century, there were 4 such states: the Jurchen Empire in the northeast, the Tangut Western Xia in the north, Karakhitai in the northwest, and the Song dynasty south of the Yangtze River. Although the Song was the only one of these states ruled by the Han Chinese majority, the rulers of all 4 states adhered to Chinese customs and administrative practices. The Mongolians would benefit substantially from the divided state of China at this time. Genghis came to see the Tangut Empire both as a source of plunder for his restless armies and a testing ground for their ability to fight the more powerful Jin. After the initial raid in 1205, Genghis launched a larger campaign in 1207 which forced the Tangut to agree to pay an annual tribute. When the payment was suspended in 1209, Genghis organized a large invasion force and embarked on a punitive expedition. Eventually, the desperate Tangut decided on a formal submission to Genghis Khan and promised to supply troops for future campaigns. By 1211, with his rear secure, the 49-year-old Genghis Khan was ready to turn his attention to the Jin Empire. While this was motivated in part by the desire to avenge frequent Jin raids into Mongol territory and the relentless logic of perennial conquest to feed and pay his troops, the invasion of northern China had been a long-held ambition. The Jin had conquered northern China from the Khitan Liao dynasty at the beginning of the 12th century, and proceeded to drive the Song emperors south of the Yangtze River. While a peace treaty was signed between the Jin and Song in 1142, relations between the two Chinese powers remained uneasy and the peace was interrupted by occasional conflict. At the beginning of the 13th century, The Song embarked on an effort to reclaim territories north of the Yangtze River. While the Jin easily defeated the invasion force, within a few years the Jin heartland of Manchuria faced a Khitan rebellion partly encouraged by Genghis. Having been preoccupied with its wars against the Song dynasty, the Jin left its northern frontier relatively undefended. As the Jin planned to strengthen its northern defenses by building a new wall, Genghis decided that it was time to strike. In early 1211, Genghis called a Kuriltai or Grand Council in which he set out his plans to conquer northern China. Unlike previous steppe peoples, who had intermittently conquered parts of northern China and abandoned their homeland to newcomers, Genghis intended to maintain his power base in Mongolia, from which he would rule over an empire that incorporated both the nomadic steppe cultures of Central Asia and sedentary cultures of China. The invasion force of around 100,000 men began moving in March. Genghis divided his army into 3 columns. The eastward column was commanded by Jib and Sabidii, the central one was led by the Khan personally alongside Talyui and Makali, while the western column was commanded by Genghis' 3 other sons. While Genghis' elder sons faced no opposition after crossing the Gobi Desert, the other 2 columns raided the area north of Jin in an attempt to draw the enemy out to battle. When the Jin armies refused to take the bait, Genghis decided to march his forces south. In response, the Jin formed 2 armies, one to face the advancing Mongols in a frontal attack and the other to strike against Genghis' right flank. Genghis ordered Jib to march his men westwards behind his column and eliminate the threat to his flank, leaving the Jin with a single army, while the Jin commander deployed his forces in a narrow pass to prevent the Mongols from fighting on open ground. The momentum of Makali's charge proved overwhelming for the Jin cavalry, which trampled over the infantry as it took flight. The Mongols went on to win 2 further pitched battles to destroy the Jin field armies. Genghis followed up by capturing several major cities and ordered Jib to advance to the Juyong Pass near the Jin capital of Zhongdu, modern-day Beijing. Unable to take the pass by direct assault, Jib feigned retreat and went on to destroy the garrison in front of the pass. He marched on to Beijing but was recalled by Genghis, who realized that the Mongol army was not yet equipped to capture such a well-fortified city. Despite their battlefield successes in 1211, once the Mongols returned home for winter with their plunder, the Jin reoccupied all the cities they had lost. The following year, Jib led a raid deep into Manchuria and sacked the city of Liaoyang, encouraging a major Khitan uprising in the process. In October 1212, Genghis joined Jochi, Chagatai, and Ogidi to attack the city of Datong, but the Khan was wounded by an arrow and broke off the siege. In 1213, Genghis defeated a new Jin field army before taking the Juyong Pass and surrounding Beijing. The Mongol successes led Hushishu, the commander of the Beijing garrison, to overthrow the Jin emperor and install a puppet ruler with himself as regent. In November, Hushishu managed to defeat the Mongols outside Beijing, but was defeated a couple of days later and killed by his deputy commander. Genghis maintained 5,000 men around Beijing and divided his army into 4 columns which ravaged the whole empire. Genghis and Talyui led the largest detachment south and threatened the southern Jin capital of Kaifeng. In the space of 3 short months, the 4 Mongol armies rampaged through the entirety of Jin territory and left behind a trail of devastation by destroying all the crops in an effort to starve the population into submission. While Genghis returned to Mongolia, he maintained a tight blockade on Beijing and encouraged the Jin emperor to submit to him. Although the Jin signed a peace agreement in 1214 which provided for an end to the blockade of Beijing. In return for a heavy payment to the Mongols, the Jin emperor almost immediately fled south and established his capital at Kaifeng. Genghis resumed hostilities and appointed a general named Samukha to lead the siege of Beijing. Although the Mongol army was also suffering from extreme hunger, and both besieger and besieged had allegedly resorted to cannibalism, Samukha remained methodical in his approach. 2. Jin armies sent from the south in early 1215 were defeated by the Mongols. In May, the Mongols launched an assault on the city, and, after overcoming the valiant resistance from the Jin defenders, the victorious Mongols sacked the city, devastating it to the extent that the population fell by more than 3/4. In the process, despite this enormous setback, the Jin government in Kaifeng refused to surrender. In 1216, Makali defeated a Jin counterattack in the east while Samukha led 30,000 men south and joined up with the Tangut force to devastate the countryside around Kaifeng. Genghis hardened his peace conditions following Samukha's raid, and negotiations with the Jin broke down. When Genghis returned to Mongolia in early 1216, he left Makali in charge as commander in China. Makali was given an army of 70,000 men, but most of these came from recently subjugated nations who could desert him at the first sign of Mongol weakness. The limited manpower forced the Mongol commander to scale down his operations, and in 1218 Genghis himself had to lead a pacification campaign against the Tangut, who had moved away from a pro-Mongol policy under a new ruler. By the end of the year, Genghis supplied Makali with reinforcements which increased the size of his army to 100,000 men. Although he could be as brutal as his comrades, Makali also sought to consolidate Mongol control by acting magnanimously towards his defeated foes, and he had methodically subdued much of northern China. He died in 1223 with a pristine military record, having never lost a single battle in his career. Makali was aided in his campaigns by an alliance with the Song dynasty, but following his death conflict arose between the erstwhile allies, enabling the Jin to make a brief recovery. The Mongols would have to wait another decade to fully extinguish the Jin Empire. While Makali was campaigning in northern China, Genghis' attention had been drawn westwards. Since the beginning of the 13th century, Kara Kaitai had been at war with Shah Muhammad II of the Khwarezmian Empire, situated to the east of the Caspian Sea in Central Asia. In 1208, the fugitive Naiman Prince Kukluk arrived in Kara Kaitai and built up an army under the pretext of fighting Genghis, only to overthrow his overlord and declare himself Khan in 1213. The re-emergence of an old rival on his doorstep led Genghis to send an army of 20,000 men under Jib to invade Kara Kaitai. The Muslim-majority population who had suffered under Kukluk's anti-Islamic religious policy welcomed the Mongols as liberators and defected en masse. After sweeping aside Kukluk's army, Jib entered the Kara Kaitan capital, Balasagun in what is now Kyrgyzstan, in triumph, and incorporated it into the Mongol Empire. He then followed Kukluk south into Kashgaria, where he encouraged the Muslims to revolt by issuing a proclamation of religious tolerance. In 1218 Jib eventually caught up with Kukluk in northeastern Afghanistan and executed him. So began the Mongol westwards expansion into Central Asia. Even as other parts of Genghis' armies were still undertaking the conquest of China far to the east. While Jib was pursuing Kukluk, Genghis sent another army north under Joki and Subedii to pursue the remnants of the Merkit, who had allied with the Kuman or Kipchaks, a Turkic people who occupied a large expanse of the Eurasian steppe from the lower Danube in the west to the Irtysh River in the east. The Mongols had driven the Merkit Kuman army into Khwarezmian territory and defeated it in battle. Angered at the incursion, Shah Muhammad sent an army to meet the Mongols. Although considerably outnumbered, the Mongols managed to fight the Khwarezmians to a standstill before withdrawing. Upon hearing reports of the battle, Genghis was keen to maintain peaceful relations with Khwarezmia and to establish a mutually beneficial trading relationship, allowing him to turn his attention back to China. In early 1218, Genghis sent a large trade mission to Otrar in the north of the Shah's empire, a fort in the far east of Kazakhstan today. The local governor proceeded to massacre the entire contingent, claiming that they were spies. Genghis initially showed restraint and sent a team of 3 envoys, led by a Muslim diplomat, asking the Shah to hand over the local governor. When an indignant Shah Muhammad executed the diplomat in response, Genghis finally took action and declared war. As both sides prepared for war, Shah Muhammad and his advisors decided that they could most effectively fight the Mongols by retreating into their cities and forcing them into costly sieges, which the Mongols were still not comfortable with engaging in, preferring battles in the open field. Meanwhile, Genghis received a steady stream of information about the Khwarezmian Empire through the network of Muslim merchants. He knew that the empire was ridden with divisions, and that the Shah had struggled to establish centralized control from his base at Samarkand. Furthermore, the Shah's mother Turken Khatun was a powerful political figure, and could issue decrees in her own name. These dynamics played perfectly into Genghis' hands, allowing him to sow disinformation among Khwarezmian officials by issuing false decrees from Turken Khatun. Although the terrain of the Khwarezmian Empire posed considerable challenges for any invasion force, Genghis was confident in his army's ability to achieve victory. A Mongol army of 30,000 horsemen under Jib and Joki made the first move, heading west from Kara Kaitai and entering the fertile Fergana Valley in the spring of 1219 after crossing the high passes between the Pamir Mountains and the Tian Shan. Meanwhile, Genghis' main army, accompanied by his 3 younger sons and Subedii, the strategic mastermind of the campaign, would strike at Otrar. Although the Khwarezmians had intended to pursue a defensive strategy, the appearance of the Mongols in Fergana provoked Shah Muhammad into sending a large army against them. Since Jib and Joki's army was intended as a diversionary force, Jib advised retreat, but the headstrong Joki disobeyed his father's instructions not to engage in a pitched battle. Like their previous encounter, the battle proved indecisive, but the Mongols managed to inflict heavy casualties on the enemy before withdrawing from the field. By this point, the vanguard of Genghis' main army had appeared in the north and was advancing on Otrar. By October 1219, Genghis' force of 100,000 men, including allied contingents, arrived in Otrar on the banks of the Sir Darya River. While Genghis attempted to lay a trap by sending a small force up the Sir Darya towards Samarkand, the greatest city of Central Asia at that time, the Shah counted on a strong 60,000-man garrison at Otrar to hold out against the Mongols. Once Genghis realized that the Shah would not take the bait, he ordered his sons to besiege Otrar with full force. With several years of experience besieging Chinese cities now behind them, the Mongols were far more proficient at siege warfare than the Khwarezmians had anticipated, and Otrar fell quickly in February 1220. In the meantime, Joki marched north to capture the cities along the Sir Darya, while Jib turned south to close off any escape route from Samarkand. Genghis and Talyui took 40,000 men and marched southwest across the Kuzil-Kum Desert and arrived at the oasis city of Bokhara in February 1220. The bewildered Shah Muhammad was now surrounded by Mongol armies on all sides. Genghis had a particular interest in capturing Bokhara, since the city was fabulously wealthy. The Mongols captured the city after 2 weeks, and Genghis proceeded to levy heavy taxes on the wealthy elite. The capture of Bokhara opened the road to Samarkand, some 150 miles to the east. Though the Shah's capital was well fortified and defended by a garrison of up to 100,000 men, the run of spectacular Mongol victories had dented Muhammad's confidence. Genghis and Talui were joined by Chagatai and Ogdi in the siege of Samarkand. Genghis employed a favorite tactic of placing prisoners of war in the front ranks to lead the assault. Those who weren't cut down by their compatriots turned tail and fled, giving the impression that the Mongol army was collapsing. The defenders sallied out in pursuit, allowing Genghis to move in for the kill at the head of his Mongol veterans, while Shah Muhammad II managed to escape the encirclement. The Mongols captured Samarkand after a 10-day siege and proceeded to sack it with impunity. Genghis rested most of his army but sent a force under his elder sons to take control of the Amu Darya, known in classical antiquity as the Oxus River, which separated Persia from the Turkic peoples of Central Asia. The fugitive Shah Muhammad struggled to formulate a recovery plan and eventually moved to northern Iraq. Jib and Subedi led 20,000 men and captured several cities in Persia and Iraq and drove Muhammad out of his latest refuge. The defeated Shah retreated north and escaped to an island in the Caspian Sea, where he died of illness in January 1221. While the Shah was on the run, Genghis sent additional forces to invade the Khwarezm heartland. After taking the city of Khiva in December 1220, Joki arrived at the walls of Gurganj, a relief column under the command of Shah Muhammad's son and successor marched east towards Gurganj but failed to secure the support of rival factions and marched away. As Joki continued the siege and impatient, Genghis decided to send a large force under Chagatai to reinforce him. The two brothers had always hated each other and soon began to feud, and it was only the intervention of Bohorshu that prevented them from coming to blows. Genghis would respond to the familial infighting by demoting Joki and Chagatai in the succession, and nominating Ogdi as his senior heir. Ogdi brought another 20,000 men to reinforce his brothers and took command of the siege, taking the city in April 1221. After such a long siege, the Mongols carried out another notorious massacre, killing almost every single one of the city's inhabitants. The Mongols went on to treat the whole province of Khwarezm in similar fashion. The trail of Mongol destruction did not end there. As Genghis dispatched Talui to invade the Khorasan region across the Amu Darya on the Iranian plateau, the merciless Mongol prince proceeded to sack the cities of Merv and Nishapur, both of which were major centers of Islamic learning and culture and were among the wealthiest and most populous cities in the medieval world. According to some estimates, Talui's campaign resulted in the loss of over 1 million lives. In the meantime, Genghis continued to campaign in Central Asia around what is now Afghanistan, eventually pacifying the region in the course of late 1221 and early 1222. He also launched a probing attack into India, but decided that it was not worth his while to entangle himself in a new war with the powerful Indian sultans, an initiative which would overstretch his resources. Before returning home, he ordered Ogdi to pacify the Hindu Kush, while an ill-conceived revolt amongst the people of the province of Khorasan also had to be suppressed, and insurrections at Merv and Herat. Although a number of Khwarezmian mountain fortresses continued to resist, by 1223 the last remnants of The empire were extinguished, effectively leaving the Mongols in control of the vast majority of Central Asia, a region approximating to modern-day Iran, Afghanistan, parts of northern Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan. It had taken Genghis less than half a decade to do so, while Genghis and his sons were completing the conquest of the Khwarezmian Empire. Geb and Sabidiyai were carrying out the greatest long-distance raid in history. Shortly after the death of Shah Muhammad in early 1221, Sabidiyai obtained permission from Genghis to lead a campaign directed at the Cuman heartland on the Russian steppe, stretching from north of the Caspian Sea all the way westwards to Ukraine. The Khan gave him a force of 20,000 cavalry, with instructions to return within 3 years. After reducing several cities in northern Persia, they turned north towards the Caucasus. As they approached the city of Tabriz in what is now Iranian Azerbaijan, the city's governor meekly surrendered and agreed to pay an astronomical tribute.